Welcome, welcome to Literary Lights, a reading series featuring new works of Armenian literature in English. For the first time today, we are featuring two children's books, Bábo, A Tale of Armenian Rug Washing Day by Astrid Kamalyan, one of New York Public Library's 2023 Best Books for Kids, and Lost Words, an Armenian story of survival and hope by Leila Boukarim, the first picture book in English about the Armenian genocide. Thank you so much to our partners, the National Association for Armenian Studies and Research, and the Krikor and Clara Zorab Information Center. Thank you to Hovset Markaryan, Yala's executive director, for producing the Literary Lights series. Read along with the series by purchasing titles from the Nassar bookstore, online or in person, or from Yala's bookshops.org storefront. You can support our programming by donating to Yala's third anniversary fundraiser, which is on now for just 7 more days. We are only $250 away from reaching our goal, or visit Nassar and the Zorab Center's websites to donate as well. Without further ado, I'd like to introduce our two authors. Astrid Kamalyan comes from a big, happy Armenian family where she is the oldest of 5 siblings. Childhood summers spent in Artsakh are what inspired her to paint with words. Astrid's debut picture book, Bábo, A Tale of Armenian Rug Washing Day, is a New York Public Library Best Book of 2023, a J.L. Egg Gold Standard selection, and has earned starred reviews from Kirkus, The Horn Book, and Publishers Weekly. Astrid is a member of the Children's Media Association. Bábo is the very first children's book in American traditional publishing with Artsakhi representation. Leila Boukarim was born in Lebanon, grew up in several countries, and now resides in Berlin. She has published a number of children's books internationally, including Lost Words, an Armenian story of survival and hope, and her forthcoming titles include Mariam Dreams, the story of Mariam al-Shahar, Sufra and a Food Truck of Hope, the Zips and Ilu graphic novel series, Summer Sunday, and Rima and the Painter. Leila's stories are often influenced by her Middle Eastern upbringing, her observations as a citizen of the world, and the playfulness that arises from raising 2 young boys. In addition to writing and editing, Leila also spends her time reading, proudly hoarding books, embroidering, cooking, and trying to impress her cat. I'm so excited to have these two authors with us today. I love both of their books and have read them to my daughter. And it's been just such a gift to have these stories to share with her. So without further ado, Leila, would you like to read from your book? We're going to have both authors read an excerpt of their book, and then they will have a conversation with each other. Leila.
Thank you so much, Olivia, for this and for having me. I'm really excited to be here with you and Astrid and everyone else. I will share my screen so that you can see the beautiful art, because if I held up the book, you may not. So the title of the book is Lost Words, an Armenian story of survival and hope. The smell of parsley and pepper filled the air as Mama and I made manta, pinching dough into tiny boats. I didn't see it coming. A knock at the door, a conversation in whispers. Mama's voice was low and urgent. You must leave with the others, she pleaded, with me and my sisters. What about you, Mama? What about Baba? I will wait for him, she said. We will follow you. She dressed us in ragged shirts with gold buttons sewn on the inside. In case you need them, Mama whispered in my ear, Hokis. She filled our pockets with nuts and dried figs. It was all we took with us. There was so much I wanted to say, but I had lost my words. Our long journey began. I looked back, hoping Mama was right behind us. We have to keep going, my sisters insisted. In the heat and through the dust, we walked. The sun burned my skin and dried my throat. The desert stretched out before us, a sea of sand with no beginning and no end. We walked for days, for weeks, for months. I held on to Mama's words like a prayer and put one foot in front of the other, until finally we reached a land with blankets and water and food, a land far from Mama. We shared a home with many children. Some told me their stories and waited for me to tell mine. There was so much I wanted to say, but I had lost my words. I waited for Mama to join us. I waited for days, for weeks, for months. I want to go back was all I could say. There is nothing for us to go back to, my sisters would reply. For a long time, I refused to believe them. I lay awake night after night, waiting for Mama. When I closed my eyes, I saw her face, smelled her clothes, heard her voice. Hukis. I was safe here, but this life felt like a shirt that no longer fit. As I got bigger, my pain got smaller. When I closed my eyes, Mama was still there. Sorry. But she was so far away, I could hardly see her. Her voice a distant echo, her smell gone. I kept one gold button close, warm against my skin, to keep her from disappearing. I grew older and found work in a new home. I fell in love and started a family. The dark space between me and Mama began to fill with love and laughter. Then my children started to ask. There was so much I wanted to say about our journey, about that day, about Mama, their Nana. The memories came back to me, the soft dough between my fingers, Mama's floured hands, an unfinished meal. But I stayed quiet for weeks, for months, for years. I had lost my words. As the smell of parsley and pepper filled the air and our fingers pinched dough into tiny boats, the question came back again. Where are we from, Dada? I didn't see it coming. I found my words, dusty from years of sitting in the dark, unspoken. I told him, my hookies, about my brave Mama and our march through the desert, about all that was lost and all that we treasure, about our food, our culture, our music, our stories. I told him about Armenia. That's the end of the book. I'm sorry. I will stop sharing.
Thank you, Leila.
Thank you for listening.
Astrid?
Thank you, Leila. Those bumps and have to collect myself before.
I'm so sorry.
It's gorgeous and true. Let me try and share my screen so you can see. So I'm going to start reading from the author's note, not from the book itself, and then I'll continue to not from the main text, I'm sorry, and then I'll continue to the author's note, to the main book. Sorry, I confused everything. I have a glossary and author's note and a little note about the tradition of Armenian carpet weaving tradition. And you can see the gorgeous arts of dialect in Anna's beautiful handwriting here. Growing up in Yerevan, the capital city of Armenia, my 4 siblings and I were blessed with a happy childhood. Every summer marked the beginning of numerous chores around the house, all headed by our Bábo. Precious bead by precious bead, Bábo and Mari, the word for mother, saved the sun in golden jars of apricot jam, bags of dried herbs, pots of pickles, and neat sacks of dried fruit. Summer was hot, fragrant, colorful, busy. Under the glow of the grapevines covering Yerevan yards, Bábo and Mari tucked the sunlight into the clouds of wool that they washed and beat to make the blankets and mattresses. They opened up pillows, washed the feathers, and let those dry, lulled by the breeze. And then there was the carpets to be washed. There were the carpets to be washed. Artsakh rugs passed down to my Mairik from her great-grandparents, waiting to be bathed under the sun. My 4 siblings and I couldn't wait for the sunny day in mid-June when we'd get to run around barefoot over the warm palm of our yard and splash in water and soap. So this is where the story comes from. And let me try to go back to how to do this quickly. The beginning of the book, and I'm just gonna read a couple of pages so you can see Anna Emergent's gorgeous illustrations. Warm and soft, wrinkling, tangy, sweet, shrinking, Cherry plums are drying under the sun. Will Bábo notice if I have one more? Tato, hurry, sister calls. Everyone is already there. It's today. I love this day. I grab a brush and we skip barefoot down the warm stone stairs. Anna, wait for me, I shout. On the sunlit street between our house and Arek's house, we will soak, sop, and wash the rocks. Fluffy rocks topped with bubbly clouds. Bounce clouds, I spring. And the rest is a story with chickens and kids and a dog as the main characters. So there is some laughing involved. A rare case of happy Armenian story.
I love Bábo. Astrid, thank you for that. I love this book so much, as you know. I love how fun it is and how musical the text is. You are such a brilliant writer. I, of course, read the story to my children. My children are older than your average picture book age, but they also loved it. And I can only imagine little ones, you know, our youngest readers screaming again at the end of the book, because your words really do sound like music. And it's beautiful illustrations complement them so well. And I love the sensory details that you include as well. You pull us right into this scene. And even though this is set in Armenia, it even takes me back to my own summers in Lebanon, because there are so many things in common, you know, the smells and the feeling of the warm sun and the fruit drying in the sun as well. And it's just such a special book. And now for the questions. So Astrid and I are going to interview each other, and we decided to keep it very organic. I wanted to ask you about potential challenges you may have faced editing a story that is so personal to you, because this is based on your childhood and your own experience. And it can be hard to kind of take things out and kill those darlings, as we say. And I wondered about whether or not you struggled with this, if this story was different when you started out, and if it kind of transformed into what it is today.
Thank you, Leila. Jan. First, I want to say that I love Last Words, and I love the feeling that you created. You could create a feeling of home and loss at the same time and give the goosebumps. I still have them. And I thank you for the courage to tell this story, because really it is the first picture book about the Armenian genocide, and it takes a lot of courage to talk about this topic to kids in an age-appropriate manner and do it so lyrically and in such a gentle, beautiful way as you were able to do it. So kudos to you, and thank you, huge thank you as an Armenian parent for giving me a space and a way to talk about it to my children.
Thanks, everything to me coming from you. It really does.
It's beautiful. So as far as the question about things being personal, I wanted to keep a certain, it is based on my happy childhood memories. It is based on the characters. So Tato is actually my younger sister. She's 2.5 years younger than me, and I kept her name. I changed other names. I have 3 brothers and a sister. I didn't include my 2 younger brothers in the book, and they're still unhappy about it. Like, where am I? You didn't include me, and Arek is our friend. I intentionally wanted to have some distance from my real family, because I wanted this book to belong to everyone. It was not just written for our family, and that distance was intentionally there. Plus, I thought it's going to be too many characters, because I wanted each character to have a little part of dialogue, for their personality to be seen, even though that's such a random and chaotic activity. I mean, washing rags, there is no structure to it. In a context of lacking any structure, how do you show the characters? And they don't even have many choices to make, right? It's not a traditional Western narrative arc kind of book. So we needed to have a limited number of characters that would allow each one of them to shine. So Anna is a little more proper. She cherishes the family traditions. Guess who she is? Proper whatever at all, but I love family stories. I love keeping them and I love thinking about them. And Sevak, he's strong-willed. You had to show that in a limited space. So yes, definitely having dialogue and having their personality shine without taking up too much space. And then the book actually changed from being second person point of view to first person point of view. So that was another challenge, to keep something being told from a child's perspective, being relatable to children, but also I try to be lyrical. So how do you do that? So it sounds lyrical and authentic to the children's speech at the same time. So that was the challenge.
Well done. I think that was a really good choice.
Thank you. So that was beautiful critique partners, really hinting at second person.
Okay. Yeah, that's a big change also. And I think it takes a certain amount of courage to kind of distance yourself from your own personal story as you try to tell it to a wider audience. And as someone who's told my own personal stories and worked with lots of clients who've told their own, we tend to get precious about the details, right? And then, of course, there's the fear of upsetting your family members. I'm sorry.
Why are you not Curly? Why did you change daddy's name? It's coming from my nephews. Like, they take it very seriously. How dare I?
How dare you?
So, yes.
I love that. Can I ask you one more question before we move on?
Sure.
How open was the industry to a story like this that, I don't know, some may see as niche, although I don't think there is such a thing really. But I know that the industry does tend to respond in this way if something is not very commercial, let's say, and Western commercial specifically. So yeah, I'm curious to hear about what sort of feedback you got before you sold it.
Yeah, Bábo was a very quick sale, which I have learned that is not how things always go in the publishing industry, because with my other Armenian manuscripts, I do get that feedback where, Armenia is not one of the countries that are specifically looking at right now. It's okay. That's a whole completely other story. But with Bábo, we subbed it only to 5 editors. And Bábo is also how I found my agent, and she loved the manuscript. I never really thought it's going to land me anything, but it landed me an agent and a book deal. And 2 of them were interested. With one of the editors, she said the marketing department thought that there's not going to be a big enough market. So yes, absolutely. It was perceived, at least by one of the publishers, as, yeah, we love the story, but can we sell it to a big number of people? Is there a big enough market for it? But the other publisher, my wonderful publisher, Charles Bridge, who were publishing diverse stories and STEM stories way before they were, so popular as they are now. They are one of the pioneers, and I applaud them. They are wonderful, and they give you all the space really to express yourself. They let you be truly who you are. They found that Bábo will get a go. And the rest is history. Yeah.
I'm very happy that they did, and that you found a good home for your beautiful book.
Thank you. Can I ask the same question, by the way, about lost work? I had a lot of other questions, but I never thought to ask, how accepting the American public were to this idea.
Okay. Yeah. No, my story is very, very different. It was not accepting of this idea at all. And my journey was much, much longer with this story, which is to be expected, of course. I mean, joyful, lighter stories they tend to be easier to sell for obvious reasons. And I wasn't sure if I was doing the right thing when I decided to try and get this traditionally published. I wasn't sure this book would ever get published, actually. But I wanted to give it a go anyway, because to me and to my family, it felt like a very important story. And I have lots of Armenian friends in my life as well, and I knew that I was not alone in feeling this way. And of course, yeah, anyway, so I decided to try to do this, and the process of writing and editing again and again and again, also submitting and receiving feedback from editors, and then going back to the story took 4 years total before it finally sold. And in those 4 years, most of if I received feedback at all, which of course you don't always, the feedback was always along the lines of, this is not a story for children, this is not appropriate, this is not for a picture book audience, and so on. And I got so much of this that I really started to doubt myself at one point, and I wondered if they were right, if this really was too much to give a 4 to 8-year-old. But because I had young boys of my own and I wanted to tell them the story, I was determined to make it work somehow. And so the manuscript sort of went through a process of too much information, too heavy, too not enough, not honest enough, too hopeful and too optimistic, which did not feel honest or true to the actual story. And that's not what I wanted to do. And I was very lucky that by the time this actually got attention on a Twitter pitch event called DV Pit, which has stopped. It stopped recently, actually, unfortunately. I got a like from my editor, the editor who ended up buying the story. And when she looked at it, she essentially wanted me to rewrite the second half of the story to bring back all of that honesty and, the details that I thought were too much, that I felt like I needed to take out because of everything that other editors and critique partners and so on had told me about the story. So I was very lucky to find someone who encouraged me to lean into the honesty. And I feel very lucky that I found her and that she found me also, and that she let me tell the story the way that I wanted. Yeah. And here we are. So it took 4 years, but then another 4 years from the date they made an offer until now, 2 weeks ago, when the book came out. So 8 years total.
Yeah, that sounds pretty much like traditional publishing.
Yeah.
I'm grateful to your editor for fighting for truth in our stories, because that's what our stories are for. They're not for just entertainment, they're for truth.
Yeah. And I think, and she actually, her offer letter, I call it a love letter and not an offer letter, because it really does read like a love letter. And in it, she talks about her own family history and her grandparents who survived the Holocaust. And so this was her connection to the story. And this is why it resonated so deeply with her. And also the fact that she had an Armenian friend who was the person who told her about the genocide before she had ever heard about it. So this felt very personal to her as well. That connection, I felt like, was a miracle. I found the editor who really got it. It felt
Yes.
like, yeah.
Yeah, that's what we want for our manuscripts, the person who actually lets it be what it wants to be and helps it become the best version of itself, much like with partners. Sorry, this is my lightning. So in our conversation, I remember you once mentioned that you didn't know about the genocide before. So what was your reaction the first time? So you're a grown person, and the first time you're hearing about the Armenian genocide, something that we're not taught in schools around the world.
Yeah, this is a story I tell all the time, because it was it felt like a very pivotal moment in my life. Something inside of me shifted on that day, and I was left completely changed. And this was in my first year of university. in Lebanon, in Beirut. And my roommate was an Armenian Cypriot girl, a dear friend until now. And it was April the 24th, and she said, let's go to this photo exhibition. And I had no idea. And then I got there, and that was the first time I was reading about the Armenian genocide and looking at pictures that were so shocking to me. And that's when all these questions started to come up for me, like why we learned about this period in time in school again and again and again. How did the books skip over this? How could they just delete this part of history when 1.5 million Armenians were killed? And why would they do that? And that was really the day that I started to become more curious about history and how it's taught, and why only some parts are taught and some are intentionally left out. And it was, again, I also say when I tell the story, it wasn't that we hadn't learned about atrocities. I wasn't shocked by human nature. I mean, we already knew at that point that humans are capable of things that we as individuals cannot fathom. But it was the fact that this was not taught to us in school, the fact that it was not talked about also. And there's a huge Armenian community in Lebanon, right? So there's also that. So why wasn't this something that we were talking about? Yeah, so that was an important day for me that I will never forget. Every time I think about it, it feels like it happened yesterday, honestly. And it also, yeah, I'm sorry, I'm very emotional today.
We both are. I mean, which is why I'm so
Yeah.
grateful for this book.
Thank you.
And it is true, and it is important. And every single editor who didn't say yes to us, to
Yeah.
you, to having this story out, I hope they understand now how different.
I really do. I feel like now, especially after, the last few months, last year, in light of everything that we have witnessed now, I have believed this from the day I learned about the Armenian genocide, and from the day that I learned that Hitler was emboldened by the fact that people were not talking about it.
After all,
that
about Armenians.
the denial that kind of just, denial, genocide denial leads to more genocide. And, we can see this today.
I think we articulated very clearly that genocide denial is stage 10 of genocide. It will tell people that when you deny it, you are participating in it.
Right.
Even if you think that you didn't directly commit the atrocities, you are actually participating simply by denying it. That's a thought that I think a lot of people have learned, or hopefully are learning,
Yes.
in the past years, because of the tragedies. They never stop exactly because of that denial. The tragic events are gonna continue happening.
Yeah, exactly. Which is why it's so important we continue to talk about these. We continue to talk. And to our children specifically, to our youngest children, and they can handle a lot more than we give them credit for.
They are much better souls than we are. So
absolutely.
I was irritated a few days ago at a person, and my son went to me and said, "Mama, did Astrid create him too? Did God create that person too?" And I couldn't hold onto my anger and irritation anymore. And that was so grounding, such a huge lesson. I was the bad person in this story now, and that came from a 6-year-old who can teach you more in one question than any adult.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, kids are amazing.
So I wanted to ask you about the title of the book, because we are quite literally at a loss of words with what is happening now in the world. And this title is the perfect manifestation to, how we're feeling, and to what it actually is. It's a loss of words.
Really.
Quite literally, there are no words to explain the extent of the atrocity. But how did you come up with the title? Like, how did you decide this is going to be on the cover of the book?
Yeah. Quite literally, we're at a loss for words. I say this, I think, every day. I've been saying this every day for the last few months. I have no words. But for this book specifically, the story was inspired by my husband's grandfather, whom I never got to meet. He passed away before I met Haik, my husband. But of course, I heard so much about him through Haik. And ever since I met Haik as well, my Haik, because we're both married to Haiks, I have watched him since 2002. That's when I met him, trying to piece together his family history, trying to find these missing pieces and to understand what exactly happened to every member of his family and who exactly were the members of his family. And he always said to me that his grandfather was sad a lot and he was angry a lot. And his grandfather arrived in Lebanon, in Tripoli, with his two sisters. And his sisters were very sad a lot. And I've seen pictures and you can really see it in the pictures. And he says to me, Haik, that his grandfather could never talk. He could never tell the story of what happened, which is completely understandable, of course. I mean, to even try and imagine the trauma, the journey that the three of them went through, I couldn't even imagine it. And he was a child, of course, when it happened, and when he made his way to Lebanon without his parents. So Haik never got the story from his grandfather. There were bits and pieces, things that he would say every now and then, clues and names of towns. And of course, from his grandfather's sisters, and then later from his father and from his hukur. Yeah, and he has been trying to build that story from all of these clues that he collected, also from other people, right? He has reached out to Armenians all around the world to try and understand. And to this day, of course, he doesn't have the answers that he's looking for, although he did meet somebody here in Berlin whose grandfather was from the same town as Haik's grandfather. So that's a miracle that we just recently, that just recently happened, and we're very grateful. But really, so his grandfather had lost his words, like so many survivors. They didn't have the words. And so many survivors also wanted to protect their own families, from the trauma that they themselves had suffered. So this is very common in so many families. I spoke to lots of Armenian friends, and they said the same things about their own grandparents, that this was not something that was really talked about in their homes either.
True. Yeah.
So yeah, that's where the title came from.
But when we lose our words, we also lose our history.
Yeah.
There is a lot that I didn't know about our family. I realized that I didn't know how many sisters one of my grandfathers had, just because I didn't know the full history. And there's a lot that I do know. But even in that situation, because they went through the atrocities in 1920s, the Shushi massacre, and then you realize, oh my God, but how many sisters did he have? And that's where you understand that these lost words, they're also lost family history. And then they're also a lost history of a people.
Yeah. Actually, yeah, this reminds me that when I first started thinking about writing the story, we were approaching 100 years already after the genocide. Um, and all the survivors were old and close to disappearing, and with them, of course, this history. And so I felt a sense of urgency as well to kind of collect as many words and stories as I could before this happened. So yeah.
I mean, I was lucky with my direct grandfather, grandmother, but great, we're
Yeah,
going several. There is so much that we do know. There is so much that we
sure.
cherish. The deeper you dig, the more you realize it was an intentional erasure, not only by those who directly did that, but those who supported it through the textbooks, the Soviet textbooks, etc. Intentional erasure. Changing last names also was another thing. They would change the last names of people so we couldn't find each other. And this is something from my husband's family history. The bigger families would be divided into smaller with very generic last names. So if you had something like Zanons, it changed into something like Gregorian, very generic. How do you find your people? How do you know who is your great grandfather? But some bits and pieces stayed, and one of my favorite, not just spreads, but also it opens up with them making Monty, right? And then it is echoed closer to the end of the book when he's making Monty with his grandson, right? And this food, I think, is one of the things that we find easier to preserve, and it's so universally accessible, right? Can you tell me a little more about, was it really a staple in your house? Did your husband's house, did they really make it? Do you cook it?
Yeah. So it's funny. Manta is very big in our home, and it was very big, of course, in Haik's home when he was growing up. And Haik's grandfather, who was Armenian, married a Lebanese woman, and she completely embraced Armenian culture, Armenian cuisine. She was fluent in Armenian, and cooked Armenian. And manta was one of the things that she made very well, and she was famous for, apparently. And then she passed this recipe down to her daughter-in-law, who's German. So Haik's mother is German. Oma, my children's Oma, also makes manta and is known for it because she makes it so well. And then she passed this recipe down to me, and I will make it when I have time. I will make it because it's an all-day thing, isn't it? Which also makes it so special because it's such a family activity. You really all get together around the table and talk as you prepare this meal together. And that's what I love about it so much, other than it tastes amazing. It's the process that I love so much.
It's so true.
Bring us together, and it's very meditative. Yeah.
Very typical Armenian experience of getting together, doing something that could be considered a chore, but it's not. We're just enjoying the whole of it.
Yeah. And my little one, he loves to help me as well with the pinching of the making of the little boats. So, and this is his favorite food. Manta's his favorite. So he's always asking for it. Sadly, we cannot always make it, but yeah, we try to make time for it. Yeah. Astrid, I want to ask you a few questions as well, if we still have time. I don't want to take up our entire session. May I?
Of course.
I wanted to ask you if you had considered grown-ups, and specifically Armenian grown-ups, when you were writing Bábo, and how they might react to a story in which they were seeing themselves potentially for the first time in a picture book, right? Like my husband, I will tell you, when I showed him the book, I'm like, look, this is so special. He's like, I wish I took a picture of his face because his face lit up. He's like a child as he quietly flipped through the pages of the book. He's like, we used to do this. So I wonder if you thought about the Armenian parents reading this book and seeing themselves in a picture book for the first time.
Yeah, this particular thing is a very funny effect. I get grown-ups sending me photos of videos of them washing rugs, and they say like, oh, we did this with when I was a kid, and now my fiance is not an Armenian, but like we did it together. Now she knows.
I love that.
But yeah, generally when I write, I always write for the child, and I know that it is often advised to also count the gatekeeper, the parent, etc. I didn't, but I think, yeah, the grown-ups are the most excited audience because they suddenly are this nostalgia. They're connected to this book through the actual experiences. And the kids, I feel today's kids reading the book, many of them have not had that experience, including my own child, not yet, but he
Yes.
will.
Yes.
But they are so excited about when am I going to have a fun day like this. So it is by accident that grown-ups happen to also like the book.
It's a bonus for sure. It's a big, big bonus. And where would you do this with your own children? Have you thought about it? Would you do it in Armenia, or is this something you could do in Chicago?
And I was just thinking about, when I first wrote one of the very first drafts, my critic partners, my American critic partners, non-Armenians, were, you're saying you just leave the carpets to dry and you go, is it safe? You said these are family heirlooms. Like, is it safe to just leave such precious rugs? I'm like, yeah, it's Armenia. Nobody's gonna do anything, and that's one of the moments when I realized the huge difference in the culture. And I imagine it in Chicago, you take a 200-300-year-old rug, you wash it, and you just leave it next to your high rise. I mean, if you're not fined for the activity, then somebody will take care of the rug for sure. So we're back to Armenia. I mean, we'll visit often, but we were also back for 1.5 years after the war. So that's when I was hoping to do it. I didn't, and I regret it a lot, but we're gonna do it one day for sure. In Armenia, we have those little yards, driveways, and all the people who would just randomly walk by and join.
Wonderful. Of course, of course. That's wonderful. I wonder, I mean, we've talked about this before, about writing stories, happy stories, and the importance of sharing joy from a community that has been through so much. And this is something that also resonates with me deeply, as a Lebanese person. It is so hard to find happy Lebanese stories, happy Lebanese movies. It's almost impossible. They're almost all about the war and growing up in the war and surviving the war and so on. So if you can talk a little bit about what it means to you to write happy stories, happy Armenian stories, not just for Armenians, of course, for Armenians, but also for everybody else.
Yeah, well, actually, I think joy is how we survive the war. I mean, the wars and the genocides happened, but we have joy not in terms of superficial silliness, but in terms of true love for each other and community and care. And that's how I understand joy in general. And if you look at Bábo, none of it comes from any material possession or anything that has to do with external circumstances. The joy in Bábo comes from the love and bond between family members, from the reactions of Bábo, how she's caring and very forgiving and lighthearted. The chickens run wild, something happens, and she's just laughing at it. And this is our true nature. I truly believe that even though our history and our reality and what we are dealing with right now is extremely harsh and tragic, I think we have, through our family connections and through the power of love, we as a nation, we have true joy inside our hearts. So it's very important, in my opinion, to express that side of ours, because as a child, I was surrounded by all the love. I mean, imagine the amount of love of a parent who keeps you fed and clothed and clean when there is no gas, electricity, and water. That was part, not all of it, because I traveled and I lived in different places, but a part of my childhood was when I went to the first grade as a 7-year-old. I did my homework under the light of a kerosene lamp, and I was happy because of all the love. Imagine how devoted our parents and grandparents were to their families and to us, right? And we absolutely have to talk about it, because that is what gave us resilience. And the other thing is resistance. How do you resist everything if you have no source of joy, if you have no source of empowerment? So of course, it's very important to talk about the keys to our strength as a nation.
That was so beautifully said. Thank you. That was amazing.
Asking this question, I hope we will see more of joyful Armenian books and Lebanese books.
So, and more of Bábo, I hope, as well.
You're giving me ideas.
Please.
No, it's a funny question that people keep asking. I've never thought that Bábo has serious potential. I mean, I never
serious potential. Yes,
serious,
she does.
I keep insisting.
Love her. Love Bábo.
Absolutely. I hope Bábo is the first in a series of Bábo books. I have to thank you both so much. I've gotten just goosebumps listening to you both. But I have to thank you also because in September, when Artsakhsis were forced out of their homes, I really struggled to know what to do to help, as I'm sure all of us did. And my Artsakhi friend's nephew, who was 5 at the time, had lost his home for the second time in 3 years. And I wrote to Astrid and said, please, can you record yourself reading Bábo in Armenian, in the Artsakhi dialect? And she said, absolutely. And it was just so meaningful to me to be able to give this child just a moment of joy through this beautiful book. And at the same time, I was trying to explain to my daughter, what was going on and what was happening to the Armenians of Artsakh. And I struggled because she always asked me why would someone do that? And I don't know why. I really struggled to explain evil to myself. And now, of course, we have lost words. And Leila, thank you so much for writing this book and for sharing your story of how persistent you were in publishing this book. Just and ensuring that we have this story to share with our children, because both books really, they're not only the stories, but they open up so many topics of conversation. And so as a parent and as a reader, thank you both. It's just I'm so grateful to you both for writing these books, and I'm excited to see the books you are coming out with next. I wanted to ask just a couple questions. First, characters in children's books, whether they're human, animal, or inanimate objects, are almost always male or non-gendered, and rarely from underrepresented backgrounds. Astrid, why did you choose to make your protagonist a girl? And is gender something you both think about when coming up with new ideas?
So in case of Bábo, since it was based on my childhood memories, the main character is actually based on my sister, and I kept her real name. And so she was naturally a girl. But in general, when I write the manuscripts, when it comes to the main character, at least, I don't intentionally decide anything about them. They come to me. It's, in Armenia, people knock your door and just randomly come by, and you open the door, like, welcome, Kofe Kozek. So that's how I do it with my characters. And once they're there and there is word building going on, that's when the secondary characters, I could think about gender to make sure, like, we have everyone represented, or we have more interest through diversity, etc. But the main characters decided for themselves, so I don't have an interesting answer there.
I love that. I hope characters will show up at my door soon. Leila?
Well, I made mine a boy, of course, because my husband, and because this was really inspired by his grandfather. So this character is really my husband's grandfather. But gender is something that I'm always thinking about when I'm writing stories, and the default tends to be male, which we need to change, we need to work on. I was actually recently at a school here in Berlin reading my graphic novel, which features two gender-neutral aliens. And we talked about comics, and then I had the children draw their own comics. And then I went around asking the children to tell me about what they drew and what their stories were. And this was 3 classes with almost 25, 27 children in each class. And every one of them said to me, he. Every one of them had male characters. So he's doing this and he wants that. And the main character was consistently a he in the 3 classes. And this really goes to show that we have so much work to do when it comes to gender representation in picture books and children's books in general. So this is something I'm always thinking about, not just an author, but also as an editor with my clients. And I'm always suggesting, why not make this a female or maybe a non-binary character? Something to think about.
Well, Yala is interested in supporting children's literature. As I said, this is the first event we've had with 2 children's authors. How can we do this? How can we best do this? How can our audience members support you both and your beautiful books?
Do you want to answer?
No, I was thinking how we could support other Armenian authors. Like, yeah, it's
for others.
We definitely have to do something within Yala for children's authors specifically, because many have had to turn to self-publishing. And Leila, you mentioned you had that thought, and there was a moment that I had those thoughts as well with Bábo, because I was worried about, will I be able to keep the authenticity of the story, right? And sometimes it takes collective action and collectively standing firmly on your grounds for editors to understand there is no backing, we're just keeping it as it is, right? And that's one side of the story, and the other is obviously the more technical side, where how can we help you with advice? Maybe we could have some sessions like Q&As with children's authors. I don't do critiques outside of my critique groups as like a professional editor, but I'm always happy to read books by Armenian and non-Armenian authors as well, if they are on the topic of Armenian arts of representation, to ensure authentic representation. So just feel free to ping.
Thank you.
Same. I would say the same as well. I am a freelance editor, and my door is always open to Armenian creators who are starting out, who have questions about the industry, about how to get started. If they need eyes on their manuscripts, I am here. I am here, so please feel free to reach out.
Thank
I
you.
want to see all the Armenian picture books, all of them.
Me too. Thank you both. And if you are a children's author, or if you'd like to be a children's author, let us know how we can help you. We would like to form a children's literature committee. So if you would like to join that, please shoot us an email so we can see more Armenians represented in children's literature. A question from the audience. From Teresa, what was the process of the illustrations for your stories, and how were you involved in the process of choosing the way your stories were depicted?
You want to go first?
Should I go first? Okay. I actually feel terrible that I didn't mention my illustrator, or the illustrator I worked with, Sona Avedikian, a wonderful, wonderful human and a very talented artist. The reason actually why it took us 4 years to publish the book from the day the offer was made was because the publisher wanted to make sure they had enough time to find the perfect Armenian illustrator for this book. And they of course, I wanted an Armenian illustrator, but this came from them. So it wasn't something I needed to ask for, which was great. And they found her relatively quickly, and I feel so lucky that they did, because she was still she hadn't graduated yet when they found her, and this was her first job. So in terms of how much control I had, yeah, amazing. I don't like to be in control at all. I don't want to dictate how an illustrator is going to see my words. And I strongly believe that an artist has to have complete freedom to, you know, to interpret the story as they want and to add their own layer of storytelling. But because I think because this is a historical nonfiction, my editor wanted me to describe every spread as I saw it, with details based on my own research. I don't think she shared everything with the art director. I don't think maybe she didn't share anything with the art director. But my editor wanted to be clear on what was correct visually and what wasn't. So that's the extent of it. And I was in the process, they shared some sketches with me, and I mean, I was happy from the start to the end. And like I said, I don't like to intervene at all unless something is, you know, incorrect or, yeah, which has rarely ever happened. So, yeah.
Thank you, Astrid.
I was very lucky in that my both agent and editor were very open-minded and so what I did, I proactively messaged my agent and said, hey, I want this book to be illustrated by an Armenian illustrator in order to ensure its authenticity. And I knew it's very difficult to get that context if you haven't been there. I mean, it's in the middle of city, but there's a chicken, what's going on? So and I was Anna Emergence fan way before I knew I was going to be published, and she's amazing. And her illustrations, they're full of joy. I mean, Bábo or not Bábo, she's a beautiful, warm person, and her illustrations really illuminate the way she is. So I suggested, you know, what would you consider Anna? And everybody loved her work. Like she was such a perfect, and I'm so grateful that they were so accepting of that action from a debut author who doesn't have anything else published yet, really proactively suggesting something. They should be very patient with me and they were, and everybody loved her work. It spoke for itself, and I'm also very grateful to Anna for agreeing to sign on this project, and we have what we have now. And I didn't, as far as participating in the illustration process itself, the only thing that I did was, both when it comes to the text and the illustrations, I had an expert on rug weaving, and Diana Hovanesyan. I lived in Armenia back then when I was editing the book. So I would send the screenshot and be like, did we get all the details correctly? Is this a correct color combination? So we had her okay on everything. On all these gorgeous rugs, we wanted to make sure that even if people won't notice, we wanted to make sure that this is Khanzoreski, Vishapagot, like all of these are true to the way they are. So that's the only, it's a very technical kind of way to participate in it. But the magic was that some of the details that Anna got, they were as if I would go and ask her, could you please? I never did, but when my sister saw this spread with Gata, she said, oh, did you tell Anna about Bábo's famous Gata? And I said, no, I said nothing. Right? And her grandma was famous for her Gata, and so is mine. And that's where the magic was for me. I would open the spread and I would go like, oh my, I'm so lucky that I didn't say a word to her, because she did it so much better than I could ever ask for.
Oh, my daughter keeps asking when we go to Armenia, can she have the apricot cake in your book? So
the recipe of my grandma's cake. So that's her cake.
You send it over. One more question from Judy Saryan. She says, I'm so grateful that you both found the words to tell your stories. Did you both know from a young age that you wanted to be writers?
No. I thought I was going to be a fashion designer, and look at me just wearing black all the time.
Should I go first?
Sure.
No, I did not. I did not. I love books, but I did not. I never thought I would be a writer. I'm actually a nutritionist by training. Yeah, and I have a master's degree in nutrition and MBA. I worked at Nestle for forever. So this was never a plan. But then when we decided to leave Lebanon because okay, that's a story for another time. We My husband found a job in Singapore, and we moved there, and so I had to quit everything and go to Singapore with a toddler and a very pregnant belly, and I had the chance. I was kind of forced to, but it was also an opportunity for me to reinvent myself. And that it was during that time when I was spending so much more time with my kids than I had before, when I discovered that my eldest was a highly sensitive child, and we had been struggling with him and with trying to understand why he was behaving in the ways that he was behaving. And so that discovery led me, and his love of books, of course, led me to attempting to write a story for him. And when he responded well to it, I decided to take it seriously and start learning everything I could about writing and publishing. And the rest is history, I guess.
There's lots of history. Like Judith, very prolific. I always wrote. As soon as I learned the languages and I learned the reading, I self-taught myself to read. I would write different poems and such, but I never really thought to publish it because who needs it anyway? And and also a lot of it was quite I mean, I would write science fiction before I had my child, and it was some depressive, and true, it was like Black Mirror. Really think about Black Mirror. That's what my writing was. And I didn't feel an urge, oh, the whole world needs to know how bad things are going to be if we let technology really take over. There was no sense of that. But when my child was born, this picture book wrote itself in my head. It was like, you know what, I like you. The first time I felt, but I do want this out in the world. It is happy. It's beautiful. It's like, why wouldn't I share it with kids? So that's when I started attending all the conferences and learning. And by the way, I have an MBA too. So I now feel less terrible about it because I never put that in my bio as a children's author, because who needs it? And kids don't need it whatsoever at all. It's not an interesting, I can't even say that I worked as an animator at Disney or something, right? I have nothing like that in my bio to excite the kids with. But yeah, that's where I started working on myself very intentionally to make sure that I can tell those stories, in a quality manner, quality way.
Well, I'm so glad you both found children's literature as a reader, as a writer, as a parent, as an Armenian. Thank you, thank you, thank you. I'm going to hand it over to Judy Saryan from Nasser.
Thank you, Olivia, and I'm here on behalf of Nasser, the National Association for Armenian Studies and Research, and I want to thank Yala and the Krikor and Clara Zorab Information Center for bringing this incredible program. I want to thank all of you for coming and for being here. This was just a magical, powerful event, and I am so grateful to Astrid and to Leila for agreeing to do this. I can't imagine a better pairing of two writers and two books. They just, I don't know, they just spoke to each other, and you spoke with each other. So it all came together so beautifully. I'm just really grateful and blown away by you, by all of you. So our next event is May 4th. We're featuring Armen Davudyan's debut poetry collection, The Palace of 40 Pillars. Armen will be interviewed by the UCLA professor and literary critic, Anahid Nersessian. So please come and join us for that program. I'm sure it'll be wonderful. For those of you in Los Angeles, you can connect with Astrid in person at the upcoming event on Saturday, April 20th at 11 a.m. on Artsakh Avenue for a reading and singing of Bábo. So that promises to be really amazing.
Of our truth, a little bit of weaving our stories intro for kids.
Oh, thank you. Thank you. Thank you. That's just sounds, I wish I were there. Leila will be presenting her book in Berlin on April 21st at 5 p.m. at the Café Arakil. And this is a SPOR initiative. I know nothing about it, so I want to learn more about Café Arakil. I wanted to say also, please help us to organize more events out and like this one by filling out the form and the short survey in our chat. We really appreciate your feedback. We want to make and do programs that that you're interested in. I love the fact that you're encouraging that today we're encouraging people to write more children's books. That to me is just a fantastic initiative. So thank you for offering to do that. And again, the books are available at Nasser, both online and in person, and from Yala. So thank you all, and enjoy the rest of your day.
Thank you so much for the opportunity.
Thank you. It was a pleasure and an honor.
Likewise for us. Thank you.